You are listening to Abyss Gazing, a horror podcast where we celebrate all things spooky and mental health.
I'm your co-host, Mark.
And I'm your co-host, Josh. And Mark, what is your favorite scary movie?
Probably have to go with Halloween.
That's fair. Okay, that's fair. It's a question that took you off guard. I think it's a little too early for that.
Yeah, we usually don't do early morning recordings like this.
Hey, well, here we are. And we're talking about Scream 6. Look, man, I'm just gonna jump right into it. So we both rewatched this the entire series up to the going to see this movie. What is your relationship to this franchise?
So, I remember, and I'm going to be that old guy going back in my day. I remember back in the day when this came out. Um, the first two, everybody loved. I thought it was pretty good back in the day when it came out. Um, and then I thought they started carrying it too far. I saw the third one in the theater, and I was like, okay, now you're getting a little ridiculous with this. Um, and honestly, I hadn't seen any of them since. I may have rewatched one and two on super rare occasions, but up until we decided we were going to cover this one, I hadn't seen four, five, and six at all. So yeah,
That's like that's I guess this is kind of where our age differences really kind of show each other because Scream was one of the first, if not the first, film slasher franchise that I got into. This was kind of one of my like step up gateways away from like Are You Afraid of the Dark, Goosebumps. This was kind of like my first legitimate foray into like adult horror. Um and I watched the first like two Screams on nauseam when I discovered them. The third one, I agree. I definitely think it every time I watch it, it always has potential, but the moment that they kill off Hot and Weary, that movie immediately goes downhill. I think you kill what once made that franchise so special.
well, every one of the movies, for the most part, you've got the opening sequence is somebody being killed, and it's usually either a main character or a big name. Number one, it was Drew Barrymore. Um, Number two
Jada,
was Sarah Michelle Gellar.
nope. Number
Oh,
if you're
Jada
talking if
Pinkett
you
Smith.
yeah,
Yeah,
if you're talking intros, it's Jada Pinkett Smith and
then Cotton Weary.
Mackay Pfeiffer. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he was good in House. Sorry about
Yeah.
that.
You're fine. You're fine. Like
um,
to me,
but
like
yeah,
the reason go ahead.
that's kind of the formula of um, Scream is either kill off a major actor or character in the movie in the very beginning. That's how it happens. You
Yeah,
have
so
yeah, go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was gonna say the reason that like I want to defend this because I feel like people like will hear this and just be like, "Oh, Scream 3 is bad." Just no, there's a distinct the franchise changes the moment that you kill Cotton in that opening monologue because Cotton was so tied. You know, they joke in this movie about it being the core four, but when you look at the original two films and the opening of the first film, the core four happens to be Gale, Dewey, Sydney, and Cotton. The moment that you kill that, you A make Scream 3 a parody of what made Scream 1 so good, but you also happen to make Scream 4 and Scream 2022. They just happen to be essentially like commentaries on the trends of horror.
Well, first of all, I think we already mentioned it's early for us, and if we accidentally spoil anything, our bad. Sorry about that. So, yeah,
Don't talk about don't spoiler territory. Don't get into spoiler territory for Scream 6.
I'm not
Un
yet.
okay. Okay.
So
Let's
I
just do that.
just in case. Um, but no, I think I don't think that's what started making three kind of less than one and two were. I think it was more of the way they did the story and the way it was so over the top and more of a big budget kind of thing than the other two felt. The other two felt like a regular slasher. But then they took three into Hollywood and movie sets and behind the camera and things like that. And it just that's kind of what made it feel ridiculous to me. And then having Parker Posey be the actress for Gail Weathers, following Gail Weathers all over the place, trying to act like Gail Weathers is like it was more of the story itself than Killing Cotton.
That is fair. Not I'm not gonna say that like the Cotton is the sole reason for why that movie is the lowest point in the franchise. I definitely think that like it is like you said, like it becomes a caricature of what made the first two films so freaking impactful. And I think just a bit of history. I think the reason for that happens to be that the original plan was to bring back Schumacher. From what I've read, the original plan for that film was to bring back Stu Macher and kind of round out that trilogy. But
For the
for
third
what
one.
for the third one,
Hmm.
but the reason that they didn't do it is because there was like internet leaks, and that's the reason why. Fun fact for the second film, there were, I believe, three to five different endings where there were multiple killers that could have been there. We ultimately ended up with Nancy Loomis, who was Billy's mother, and we also got Mickey, who was Mickey's friend, was sorry, Sydney's friend. So, but for the third one, they attempted to do that, and I think the leaks prevented it. And you got this, as Scream 6 will say, you have this really ambitious solo killer where it's also the outlier in the franchise to where it's one thing. And we're both big Halloween fans, and one of John Carpenter's biggest regret as a filmmaker is making Laurie Strode and Michael Myers brother and sister. And so what do you do when you have a franchise that you don't know what to do with? You make them siblings. And that kind of, I think, really also is what turns that particular entry into just this like caricature of what once made it really smart.
Yeah, and hearing that makes sense for what I've seen in five and six, where it seems they're heading with the story, what you were just talking about.
Mm.
But wasn't that also along the time period when Matthew Lillard kind of pulled out of acting for a while and he's just recently started coming back?
No, because Screams 3 would have been a year before it would have been a year before 13 Ghosts, which we covered last year. Go check out our episode. And it also happened to be 2 years before Scooby-Doo. And to
Okay.
my knowledge and my recollection, he's never actually stopped acting. He shifted into being the voice of Shaggy actually for like well over a decade. So he walked away from like bigger roles that we knew him in, uh
I
like
thought
the Scream franchise,
I thought he
Scooby-Doo
was
13.
I thought he was one of those actors that kind of, for the most part, not completely, but for the most part, stepped away from acting because some sort of family illness or something.
Not to my knowledge. I think he did like do less live action work so he could spend time with kids because it's easier to, just sit behind a booth for a couple hours and then
Yeah.
boom, you're done. But yeah, he's also shifted into doing a lot of dramatic acting on television as well. He played the husband of I think her name is Cynthia Hendricks or Catherine Hendricks, one of the two, on Good Girls on NBC for a couple of seasons. Um, so he still acts. He's not doing as like prolific of film as he did when the original Scream came out.
Yeah. Okay. I thought there was a reason, something like that. I know there was a couple actors that happened with, and I thought he
Yeah,
was one of them.
yeah.
So
So before we get into Scream 6, we have to talk about Scream 4 and Scream 5 because we've talked about it, like we've talked about the trends of horror a lot on this podcast, but I really feel like these two entries into the franchise in particular broke away from that story, like that normal storyline that was going on in the first three films, and rather these two films position themselves to comment on the trends of horror at the time of their release. Where you had the remake boom, sorry, of early 2000s. So part four was all about remakes, and then part five is all about requels, which again, you look at Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, um, the Star Wars trilogy, like there's clearly a new trajectory of horror trends that are being done. Spiral's another one. You didn't like Saw 4, or you didn't like Scream 4.
wasn't a fan. It felt more like um a parody of the Scream series. Sorry, my brain shut down for a second. Uh, it felt more like a parody of the Scream series than an actual Scream movie.
And I think it just goes back to what I was saying. They ended up being so I for one, I enjoy the Scream 4 film. I think it is ridiculous, and I do think that in some ways it's definitely, I wouldn't necessarily go as far as calling it a parody, but I will definitely say that it definitely feels like uh it feels different. Rewatching this past time for this podcast, like I forgot how pointless of a role both Sydney and uh, Gail have in in that film. Like it doesn't really seem like they have a real purpose. Except to say that like I am related to the killer. Like there was no real reason for them to even exist in that story.
Yeah, Gail showed up to do what Gail does, and Sid showed up to help.
Yeah.
That was
And
pretty much it.
that's kind of what like everything past part two, like it seems like the franchise has kind of really struggled to have a purpose for both of those characters. Um, that's kind of where I think, but we did an episode on Scream 5 last year, or Scream 2022, whatever you want to call it.
We did.
Um, Me and Brandon did, and you
Oh,
guys can check it out on the Victims and Villains feed because this was
yeah.
before
Okay.
Mark and I took over for all things horror. At where did you land with Scream 2022?
I was five, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I would probably rank them all one, two, five, six, three, and four.
Oh, okay.
So five, it was nice to see a lot of new characters. Did think the killers were a little cheesy. Um, and I kind of figured Richie from the get go. And the friend. I actually that one I pretty much pegged from the beginning.
Yeah.
As to who the killers were.
Yeah, so Amber, and it's really interesting that they make it Amber too, because she's got like two scenes in the movie before she's revealed to be the killer. So they kind of do make that one obvious. I will say that one.
And the couple scenes they showed her in, she was acting really awkward and suspicious, more than just the, oh, look, the misdirection. This guy's kind of creepy. Um, it was kind of pointed at her, and Richie was too much of, I'm here for this, from the moment they showed him. So that one kind of gave it away. But overall, I thought it was the better movie of one of the better movies of the sequels.
All right, so my ranking for this series will of course be the first one, the second one, the sixth one, the fifth one, the fourth one, and the third one. Um, I I thought that the they built they built up this one nicer, and I think I think it's I think it might be nostalgia, but I think in a little bit of ways, like there are moments of Scream 2 that definitely outshine the first film. Um, but I think the first film gets looked at so in-depthly that the second one kind of gets outshined sometimes. And I definitely feel like, if Scream last year was a reflection of Scream 1996, then this one, right down to the killer reveal, is a reflection of Scream 2. Um, and I don't know, man. I thought I liked last year. I liked it a lot. I still think there are elements of it that work. I still think there are elements of it that don't work.
I
Once again,
like I like what they're
Gail
doing with
Weathers.
Samantha's character,
Hmm.
but it's part of without getting into six yet. It's part of why I think I know where they're going with the series.
And that's something that's like really interesting to me. Where, and I want to, I really, really want to talk about this real quick because there's a line that Tatum issues in the very first Scream where Tatum was Dewey's little sister and she played wonderfully by Rose McGowan. And she basically like it's like talking to Sydney about the events that have been going on. She's like, um, yeah, it's like we're in like a Wes Carpenter flick or something. And obviously that's an amalgamation of Wes Craven and John Carpenter. I'm almost like curious if Sam and Tara are have the last name of Carpenter because of that line.
Well, you also had some of the events took place on Elm Street. Um, there's little references off and on to other franchises throughout the series.
Oh, there very much is, but this is like a playground of references.
Yeah, it is.
And
It's
s- yeah. So
it's no doubt that that's what they were doing. Like Billy Loomis from Halloween.
mm, which
It's
also happens to be a nod to happens to be a nod to Psycho. I don't remember how it is but it is a Psycho reference.
uh, I would have thought it was a Dr. Loomis reference.
So yes, it is a Dr. Loomis, but Dr. Loomis is named after a character in Psycho. Um, all right. Well, let's jump into this one. We're gonna jump into spoilers, but so if you guys haven't seen Scream 6, we are gonna spoil it for you guys. Go check out our episode on Scream 2022. We'll link it in the bio below. But Mark, what are your thoughts? Why does this one feel less superior than last year's entry for you?
Um, a lot of it had to do with some of the characters that returned should not have feasibly been able to return. And that's so this is an issue. One of the issues I have with Scream is you get to the end sequences, and every single movie, there's police everywhere. there's ambulances everywhere, and they're just casually strolling somebody to the ambulance, and somebody who's been like shot twice and stabbed 37 times because running over with a stretch bandage around their waist, going, "Oh yeah, I'm fine, no big deal," and talking to whoever the survivor is being hauled away. Um, and that's always bothered me about the series. And you've got the brother of the twins got stabbed God knows how many times and left to bleed out for who knows how long in the last one, and now he's back perfectly fine a year later in the new one, and he's stabbed by two people God knows how many times and left to bleed out for how long. They're, oh yeah, we got one alive, and he's gonna make it, he's good. While other people that are shot and half gutted are walking around with stretch bandages going, I'm fine, I'm good, I'll recover. That's always
I'm
been an issue I've had with the series.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you brought this up because one of the things that like really struck me like deeply, no matter how many times I watch it, it always gets me every time is Dewey's death from Scream 20 from last year. Uh, because when you go back and when you watch the original films, like Dewey should have died in the second one. Like legitimately should have died in the second one because like the sequence where they're in the recording studio, him and Gail both should have died in the second one.
Mhm.
And they struggle to find purpose and relevance in the narratives moving forward in three, four, and five
Well,
because of that.
Dewey always ended up being the reference and almost the hero of each one.
He did, but I feel like you're right. Like that to me, especially I think what really frustrates me about the ending to this movie is the fact that they have this big sequence where they're establishing you can't just make a requel to a sequel or a sequel to a requel anymore. Everything's got to be a franchise. Like there's a big scene where like Mindy is laying out the franchise rules. And in laying out the franchise rules, she looks and says, no character is safe. And I was like, okay, like we've already seen how brutal this Ghostface is up until this point. So which leads us to believe that any legacy characters, Gale is of course out, but it also means that the core four, who in this case are Sam, Tara, Mindy, and Chad, all should have not made it to the end of this movie all make it to the end. Sam and Tara are like the two exceptions that like obviously make it to the back. I mean, because Tara ends up having the same injury in the climax that Dewey had in the original film where she gets stabbed in the back. Okay. But yeah, Mindy and Chad both, the way that they like sustained wounds, they should not have been able to make it past this one. And also, like while we're on the topic of it, Annika also should have died. Like, yes,
Which one was Annika?
Annika was the love interest for Mindy. Remember, she gets stabbed in the
Oh yeah,
stomach, and he like twists it and like brings the blade up. So
yeah.
she should
He
have
half
bled
gutted
out
her.
long before she got on the ladder to get across to Danny's apartment.
Yeah, and maybe we're just nitpicking, but I almost feel like half of them are relatives of the Black Knight from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's
It's just a flesh wound.
I'll bleed on you. Uh, that's kind of my feeling at this point with a lot of them, because there's no way that. And like Mindy, they're like standing around in the end sequence, and they're like, "Yeah, she ran out of the hospital because she wasn't going to stay there while we were wrapping things up." And it's like, she was pretty much half gutted on a train. How is she running from the hospital?
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text HELP to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in this show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
Yeah, those are things that like I don't know or understand, because the I feel like this franchise like really like picks and chooses who it wants to like actually kill and like develop into like formidable characters for the story moving forward. And I really, really hate that that's the case. Like I love this franchise, but that's always been a weak point, is that there have been multiple times where Gale has been wounded, should have died. Dewey has been wounded, should have died. As much as I love those characters, they should not have made it to 5 or 6.
Yeah.
You know,
And I think it plays into Jenna Ortega's favor that she's kind of the it girl right now for slashers, and has been for the last couple of years, with her role in the sequel to The Babysitter, with her being in X and things like that. She's kind of the it slasher girl right now.
yeah.
And it plays to her favor. I do, like I said, I do like what they're doing with Samantha's character, though, and her being the daughter of Billy Loomis and everything. And I kind of see, I suspect I see where they're going, and then within the next year or two, we'll probably have another Scream.
Which let's talk about that, because that's a really fascinating angle to go at. So Samantha is the daughter of Billy Loomis, who's the
And they
obvious
and they are
God.
making her out very clearly to have something like schizophrenia or something like that, where she's seeing people and hearing things.
Yeah, which I absolutely love, because there's a great mental health angle there, and I want to just jump into that in a few minutes. But what I want to say first is that Halloween has been notorious for approaching different different types of stories where they essentially try to create a storyline where Lori, so traumatized, as Annika says in the franchise rule scene, where she talks about, well, couldn't one of you guys be the killers, because you were so traumatized by what happened to you last year that it broke your brain, and the only way to rectify it is to essentially become Ghostface. There have been multiple attempts to make Laurie Strode actually pick up the legacy of Michael Myers and become the Shape herself. They have explored that in comics. Uh, had there been a third film to Rob Zombie's, like Halloween 2, they would have explored that. And that would have been a fascinating angle, but they've never done that. They've always kind of left Laurie to be this golden, like child, golden damaged child of that franchise. I think it goes back to what we were talking about a couple weeks ago with Behind the Mask. Like there is when you think about like series like Halloween, Michael Myers is as attached to that universe as Laurie Strode is. And so the fact that they are essentially positioning this franchise to potentially be Sam taking up the mantle of Billy, I think that is absolutely fascinating.
I actually don't think that's where they're going.
You don't?
No, I think they're going towards, because in the last couple movies, they've hinted at not being positive that Stu is dead. They even have a sequence in the police department in this one where they show Billy and Stu's picture on a wall, and there's a question mark by Stu. They make a comment about him being, is he really dead? Um, which makes me think they're going to end up having Sam versus Stu for kind of a final conflict, having Billy versus Stu as the final conflict of the series.
I think it'll go that way, but I definitely think that they will if this film gets going, because Radio Silence, the directors of the film, have like stated several times that they still want to continue this. And
and
so,
and they're making it very clear that Samantha's struggling with the legacy of her father, but also that she's not who her dad was, even in the acts of killing the killers.
yeah,
So I feel
I'm better
like,
than that.
yeah, exactly. I feel like they're building towards a um, Billy Loomis versus Stu Mocker.
So I think they're setting it up for both of that, but I definitely also at the same time think that we could uh potentially see Samantha taking over the mantle at some point.
That would be
Um
the obvious route.
it would be, I mean, also Billy bringing back Stu would be the obvious route as well, because fans have been wanting it since 1996. So, you
So
know,
what better made way to top off the franchise than have Billy versus Stu, who had their falling out at the end of the first one, where Billy just stabs the shit out of him, leaving him decrepit and crippled.
yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Up until the actual reveal in this one, I thought this was going to be the movie that brought back Matthew Lillard.
I I had heard that it could be, but I wasn't sure, and they made too much of a point in this one to point out the question of his whereabouts.
So
And
yeah, so
that's what made me think, no, it's not him in this one. It's going to be somebody else.
with this one as well, the Matthew Lillard has also given like talked about possibility of returning. One of the things that he talked about um is a comment on this being, of course, the first film in the franchise without Nev Campbell. Whether or not we feel like she should have been in this movie is irrelevant, but she did not come to do Scream 6 because the pay was too low. And she understands her worth, which is something that I really respect. But there are also interviews saying that Lillard will never come back to the franchise until like either he until like he is like paid the equal worth of what Nev Campbell's paid.
I mean, even still, there's too much money there to be made. It would be one of the biggest comebacks in horror history to have Stu come back at this point.
I
It would be like having an entire story of the thing across multiple sequels over 30 years, and then having Kurt Russell show up to be the final help in taking on the thing. I mean,
I, I don't disagree with you one bit. In fact, one of the things that I was really disappointed to go back to the third film, the proposed original narrative for the third film was that not Billy, Stu Macher was confirmed to be alive. Stu had developed kind of like a cult leader status and essentially had like basically like not hindered, had like groomed people to basically continue on his legacy. And in the end, it's revealed to be Stu. Like he breaks out of jail and gets his revenge on Sydney. Like that, I would still like. And I think the way that they position Richie and Amber from last year, the way that you position um things like where is Jason and Greg from this film, as well as the influence of social media on this film, you are definitely seeing that it is 100% possible to see uh, something like cults, um, like a cult built around the identity of Stu Macher, 100%.
Well, the last couple films, the killers have only had very loose ties back to the original.
Yeah, and like I think the one of the things that I really like about this film is that it it feels like it actually is focusing on the franchise in its real universe, not necessarily the Stab universe, the way that the last three films have done. They even make it a point to, there's a scene where Kirby and Dylan McDermott's character, Detective Bailey, are talking about who
Was
the
that
killer could be.
was that Dylan McDermott? Because they gave
No,
him a different name,
or sorry,
Dylan.
Dylan Mulroney,
Yeah.
who is I mean,
Now in this one, I suspected him from the beginning too.
um
I really did.
wait, we can talk about that in a second. I did not I'll talk about it in just a second, but um there's a sequence where they're like he points out that the killer is like going off of the route. He's going off of real life and not necessarily the movies. And there's a point that Kirby makes where it doesn't matter about the movies. And I think that's what really made me love this movie so much more is the fact that we're stepping back into the real world and not necessarily staying in line with the Stab movies or its toxic fandom.
Yeah. I mean, the way you could see that really is, and I'll probably get shit for being a metalhead and saying this, is Slayer fans. They're completely insane. And some of the crazy stuff they did and do. And that's kind of how they make out the Stab fans in this series is the same, just kind of insane and crazy. So
I don't know anything about like Slayer fans. I'm just gonna trust your word for one. For two, Victims and Villains or Abyss Gazing does not reflect the opinions of Mark Moore, the co-host of Abyss Gazing and the writer at Victims and Villains. We just have to put that disclaimer out there for all legal reasons.
it's the reason why I say that is it's fairly well documented. Some of the extent that some of these Slayer fans have gone to kind of show their fandom, like carving Slayer into their arms before concerts and things like that. And it's yeah, that's why I said that.
That's
Um,
that's fair.
yeah,
Um, and like also like to the fact about the the very last line in the prologue of this movie is uh no one gives a crap about the movies is what Jason says right before he like finishes or right before that's what Ghostface says right before he finishes off Jason in the apartment. And so yeah, I think it's really fascinating that they're essentially positioning this to be back in the real world. I really love that. Um, but it still continues on explore the toxic fandom that they did in the last entry.
yeah,
Where everything revolves it comes down to everything revolves around Richie, which again, if you've seen Scream 2, you know that like everything came down to uh I love her line in Scream 2. It's my motivation isn't as uh insane or as millennium as Mickey's. It's just good old fashioned revenge. And I think positioning Dermot Maloney in that position with his two other kids, Ethan and Quinn, I think you definitely allow it to be as effective. I think that's what makes this one effective for me is the fact that this is the first, this is also the first film in the franchise that I feel like probably since the second one that has been as brutal, but also as emotional as this one.
Yeah. it it kind of felt like they were trying to do a twist on number two. Um, and that's so one and two, five and six almost feel like they're remakes of each other.
A little bit. The
Yeah.
same way that when you look at like Halloween 1, 2, and 3, obviously are modern day like requels or like mirrors, whatever you want to call it, of Halloween 2018 kills and ends.
Yeah. And they all had well, the whole series, every movie had the exact same formula, and they pretty much give it away in the beginning of every one, uh, which is that's a whole other topic. But
Well,
wait, what was
I
the question?
I
I
think
got
with this one
myself
going into
distracted.
that's fine. I think with this one going into the more emotional beats, one of the things that I think this film does really well is that it allows the actual like decompression of these characters to actually grow in their tragedy and in their grief. And no case is made more re prevalent than Samantha, which we hinted at earlier, but she's still like really struggling with the fact that she is the daughter of a serial killer. She dated a serial killer. She also like happens to have like a fallout because of those two connections. And she's also like really struggling with her own legacy, which I think this film does really well because I think I don't know about you, so I don't want to speak for you. I know one of the biggest fears that I had growing up was my dad used to run his own business, and it was a business that I didn't really care about. And so the legacy was always like one of when you get of age, like I want to build this business up and then hand it over to you. And that scared the life out of me because I didn't want to be in a business that I hated. And I think that was something that like legacy is something that like I've always really struggled with, to the point of like actually not wanting kids also. Um, and I think this movie captures the legacy of that struggle of legacy to like not necessarily deny where you come from, but also that you are in charge of how you push your own story forward.
Well, one of the things with her though, and it's part of her story, is they make the state she makes the statement that she almost enjoyed the killing in the what where in five when she's talking to the therapist.
Yeah.
Um, so
So she really does. And that's interesting. It's also interesting that like that's how we meet her in this story is that she is having a therapy session with Dr. Stone in this movie. And she the scene you're pointing you're talking about in particular, she talks about like how it how it felt right. And you know, we don't really know like what happened in terms of those 5 years where she was like away from Tara, how the news of Billy Loomis and being her father, like how it affected, like it really develops. But I think that like that's another struggle for her is like, some of our legacies can be toxic, and sometimes it feels good to give into that toxicity. But like for her, I think it's really interesting to look at because she does mention that like this is a legacy that like she doesn't necessarily want to continue, but also at the same time, to your point, says it feels right. Um, and I, I'm almost curious if that's like a comment on like how horror has like depicted like female characters. Um, being, that when you think about it, like we really don't have a whole lot of female like slasher icons. I think Sleepaway Camp may be the really the only one that you can point to. There
But
are
would it
others.
be?
Let's not get into that. Um, not specifics, but like I'm just saying that like, you know, there aren't a whole lot of female centric slashers. American Mary, I feel like is probably one of the only ones, like Ready or Not's another one. Like they exist, but they're not as,
They're few and far between.
yes, they're they are very far and few between. But one of the things that I think um is kind of disappointing is that a lot of the what we've seen in this franchise so far, or like in horror, is that you look to like the main like icons of that. You have Chucky, Freddy, Jason, Michael, Pinhead. Like you have all of these characters that are essentially male. I mean, this is a male dominated landscape. And so I love the idea that this film is not only tackling the mental health angle of like the struggle of legacy, but the fact that, it's commenting on it feels right because now in 2023, it feels like we're in this landscape where literally anybody, any gender, any like sexual or gender identity can 100% it's be the killer. It's not limited to just being the traditional male landscape anymore.
I mean, I see what you're saying and where you're going with it. There aren't a lot of female slashers, and traditionally, as serial killers, most of your female killers ended up being poisoners and things like that, instead of brutality like the Ted Bundys and things like that. But what they're also kind of leaning in towards is when you get into like the history of serial killers and sociopaths and psychopaths, is it tends to be there are a lot of people with those traits, but it's the perfect combination of environment and those traits that end up
Yeah.
creating the serial killer. So they're hinting that she's scared of becoming her dad, doesn't want to be her dad, and dealing with the issues of feeling like she should be, and that it was fun to kill that dude. And and they even show her almost enjoying killing the people at the end of this one.
Yeah.
Um, but those circumstances aren't there to kind of create the monster.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting too that like she's here you have a character that is like actually struggles with bloodlust. To the point where when they first get into the theater and she sees all of the mannequins of the former killers of the franchise, she like goes up to Billy. Billy's one is the only one that is in this like pristine glass. It has the knife next to it. And she has this like brief scene where she sees Billy and he is like trying to like encourage her to like take up the legacy and like kill, and she kind of like puts her hand on the glass and she kind of has this moment with Billy, and then Tara walks up and you can definitely tell that she's struggling with the fact that like she wants to be rid of this legacy, but also at the same time, like you said, like she she knows like it feels good, it feels right as she talks about like she has a bloodlust that isn't necessarily something that she's going to feed into, but she's also positioned as a character that is going to be strong, and if necessary, she's going to give into that bloodlust, like she did with Richie, and like she did at the end with Bailey and uh Ethan and Quinn.
Yeah, it played out very similar in the second one, or in the last one too. In five, she all the shit starts hitting the fan at the party, and she sees her dad, and finally gives into it and takes out Richie. So
Which
it
go ahead. Sorry to
no,
cut you off.
it's like I said, about the series. It's pretty much follows the exact formula for every episode, and they did this in the last one, and they just kind of upped it a little bit for this one.
Yeah, I want to just harken on this real quick. The If you've seen like modern day pictures of Skeet Ulrich, like the dude is kind of like Paul Rudd, and the fact that like he doesn't really age at all, but for some reason they make him look so freaking old in these movies with bad wigs. Like I'm like, why? Why does he look so terrible in these movies?
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
They computerized de-aging for these two movies to have his little quick scenes in it, and it a couple of those scenes it doesn't even look like him.
No.
And yeah, that's kind of dumb, but I really feel like they're trying way too hard to point at Sam being the killer for the next one. That's why I go back to my original thought that she's not going to be the killer. They're setting it up to be Loomis versus Stu.
Yeah, and I'm 100% down for that. It's very like there's very few times that I cringe in these types of movies, but like his scene in particular, so he's in like two scenes. It's not very often that he's in this movie, but he just like they did him dirty the way that he like actually looks in this movie. Um, because I mean, like honestly, like you could have like just like not de-aged him. Or if you're gonna de-age someone, like at least put like them in like a mocap suit so that like their face like actually like invest into it. Like don't just make it cringy CGI. The wig looks really terrible, and I also want to point that out that he's not the only one that has a terrible wig. Like Hayden Panettiere, who plays Kirby in this movie, her hair reminds me of Jamie Jamie Lee Curtis's wig from Halloween 2. Like it's so bad. It's so noticeable because you look at like photographs of her like on this press tour and you're like you could tell that it's a wig. And
Well, it
oh,
couldn't be as bad as Courtney Cox's bangs, and what was it, two
it
or
was
three?
three.
It
It's
was
three.
three.
Man, they did her dirty in part three. So
Because we had a debate,
yeah.
me and my wife had a debate on whether or not her hair was actually cut that way or it was a really bad wig. So apparently, bad wigs are a running gag in the series as well.
Which I feel like yeah, I agree, man. I every time I watch part three, and like she's giving the lecture for the first time, I always pause it and like just laugh. Because it looks so bad. There have been so many memes that have come out about her, but on the subject of Gail, I why is she in this movie? Like she is one of the my very few complaints for this movie. I love this movie, but even seeing it a second time, I
It's her role to show up, get punched in the face, get stabbed or shot by Ghostface at least once, and then in the next one, she gets punched again because she wrote a book or did an article about the previous events that she said she wasn't going to do. That's her role.
yeah, you take Gail Weathers out of this movie, it's literally the same exact movie. Because they try and position Gale in the same way that they positioned Dewey in the last movie, to where you think fans are going to mourn. And again, Gale Weathers hasn't been relevant to this franchise since part two.
Well, it's like Raiders of the Lost Ark. Nothing would have changed if Indiana Jones wasn't in it.
That's fair.
Everything would have gone down exactly the same. They
Yeah,
actually did an episode of Big Bang Theory based on that. And now we're talking about it with Gale Weathers.
it's also amazing. It's really like I hate it too that like they've also positioned her. Um, there's a sequence in the end after like all the dust has settled, and someone comes up and they're like, "Yeah, just so you know, Mindy and Gail are both gonna pull through." I was like, "Okay, Mindy, I think they're positioning her to be kind of like one of the new core characters. That's fine. Why are you setting Gail Weathers up for a seventh installment? Why?"
Because it's Gale Weathers.
It it doesn't matter. It does not matter. Courtney Cox has no relevance to this. There's even a point where like she's talking to Ghostface in this movie, and he's like, "Is this about?" She asks him, "Why are you doing this again? Is this about the movies, or is this you trying to stay relevant?" And he goes, "I could ask you the same exact question." And she's only in like three scenes in this entire movie, and like outside of like her finally talking to Ghostface, like I think if you're gonna bring her back for the seventh film, she has to die the same way that Cott did in part three. Like make it count. Like because at this point it just kind of seems like she's showing up because the writers are like, we have
Or
to shoehorn these legacy characters in.
or you know what? Have her be the second killer with Stu. That's how she keeps surviving.
Yeah, all right. I could
Because she's doing it to stay relevant, to give herself stories.
yeah, I mean, you also too like have that to go bring it back to the second one to where like she like basically was a champion for Cotton's release. So much so that like put herself in like harm's way at points where if you like, if she wants to stay relevant, she finds out Stumacher's still alive. She champions him and they end up being the killers together. I like that way more. I feel like you give Weathers relevance and it would be a hell of a send off for that character if you
And
made her the killer.
and you've got her connected to every movie in some way, and it's all pertaining to her career. Every
Yes.
single aspect of it.
And to go back to that sequence too that I was just previously talking about, there's a point where Ghostface on the phone with her says that you would have made a hell of a killer. No one would like suspect Sydney because she was the lifeblood. Dewey was the fan favorite, which is 100% true for this franchise. But Gail would have made an excellent killer. And I still think today that like she would make an excellent killer. And I think it's something that like you haven't explored yet. And I would love to see that. Like, again, if you're going to bring Courtney Cox back for a seventh film, make her the killer.
And it would explain how she always manages to survive in
Yeah, that
every single one.
we've already talked about it, but like I honestly don't think that like she should have made it past the second film. Um, because like she's really, for as much as I love 4 and 5, she's really shoehorned into those movies.
Well, Nev Campbell was too.
Yeah, 100%.
She
Um,
was she was just kind of like, oh, she's from the original. We need to have her in it, and the movie wouldn't have changed at all if she wasn't in it.
nope.
It's the
So
Indiana Jones effect.
one of the things that I think this movie, I can't wait to get this movie on Blu-ray so that like I can dive in. You can definitely tell that Radio Silence are like fans of like not only Wes Craven but the genre of horror as well, because there are so many Easter eggs in this movie. Um,
And just
and
talking about that, it gives me Halloween Ends fear, where they built the first part of that, the first two episodes of that trilogy building up to a massive final showdown, and then it was like somebody who heard about the series tried to write an ending from memory, and with that makes me worry about something like this, what they're building towards or could have for another movie, that they're going to screw it up and do something dumb and off the walls like that.
yes and no. So when you look at what Halloween Ends is a reflection of, they handle Michael Myers the same exact way that they do in Halloween 3 Season of the Witch. And that is why I think for us, I think it definitely probably shouldn't have been that way. I can respect where they went. I don't think that they should have done it. Um, Two, I think that sorry. I think that like I think that Radio Silence is smarter than that. I mean, they've literally done nothing but bangers in their career. Even going back to their very first film, Devil's Due, which is, we've established on here, I'm not a found footage guy. That is one of the best found footage films I've seen.
Devil's
Um,
Due, which one was that?
it was the first one. It was like 2014. It's basically like a guy, his wife gets possessed by the devil, and I don't really know how else to explain it.
I may not have seen that.
I recommend it. Like we both like talked about this yesterday, like coming out of the movie, but like the Ready or Not is one of the best modern horror films made. Scream 5 was really good. Scream 6 is really good. So like I have faith in these ones and these guys. Um,
Oh, they did
but
Ready or Not too.
yes.
Okay.
Which which I also want to throw this out there. Samara-Weaving is in the opening for this movie, and I don't know if you caught this or not, but in the so this movie takes place at Halloween. There is a sequence where they're in the subway system in New York, and everyone's in a bunch of costumes. Of course, there's Ghostface. There's Hellraiser because Spyglass Media owns the rights to Hellraiser, which got me all cheered up because I have that same exact mask sitting over there. So when I saw that, I was like, F yes. Um, but there's also there's two Ready or Not costumes in that sequence as well. I don't know if you caught that. It's when they're going down the stairs, and then it's when she's like looking around at the subway as well.
No, I didn't, but I think the psychologist was in Ready or Not.
He is. He was the father in Ready or Not as well.
That movie
Um,
was far too fun.
yeah. If you guys haven't seen Ready or Not, I highly recommend it. I love that movie. But there's two that I want to point out to here. Of I'm like giddy with these like how this movie does Easter eggs. Um, I came across an article and I sent it to you last night. Ice Nine Kills frontman Spencer Charnes is a huge Scream fan. Um,
Well, they had
and
in one of the scenes on the fridge, there's an Ice Nine Kills
there is,
ad.
yes.
I,
Um, and he's also in the music video for Demi Lovato's song in this movie. Um, but there is we were talking about this yesterday on the way to the movie. Um, Wes Craven has a really interesting like beginning to his career where he did The Last House on the Left and then The Hills Have Eyes. But in between those two, he actually ventured into a little bit of uh adult filmmaking. And there is the I think it's the convenience store that gets shot up, but there's an exterior shot called Abe's Snake, which is actually a reference to his 1975 film, The Fireworks Woman, which is one of the very few adult movies that he's done. But I also want to throw this out there, and I don't know if this is an Easter egg or not, if I'm the only one that picked up on this, but being a huge David Lynch fan, I want to throw this out there. The sequence when they're at the party at the very beginning and Chad is trying to like pump up Ethan and he says, we're room 315. That is famously the room that Agent Dale Cooper stays in the Great Northern in Twin Peaks.
I mean, there's a good chance with the way all these companies have started making those little Easter eggs hidden throughout that if you don't know your movie trivia or movies in general, you miss it. So it probably is. I wouldn't doubt it.
Yeah. I really yeah, I was like thinking about it and I was like, I wonder if that's a Twin Peaks reference. So maybe I'll tweet to the directors and be like, is this a thing? Find out for you guys. Or maybe you guys know. Tweet to us. Um, but this is also probably the most brutal that the franchise has ever been. Which I really enjoy.
It was the most kind of in your face, but the last 5 and 6 have been the most inefficient killers of the bunch because they left a whole lot of survivors, a lot of survivors.
That's a fair point. I didn't even consider that. The deaths in this one are very brutal. This is also the first time that we see Ghostface actually use something other than a knife, where he uses a shotgun, man. And that
Well,
that sequence
he's used a gun a couple times that he's picked up along the way throughout the series.
has it been after the killer's reveal though?
I think so. I think in the last one there was a scene where he got a hold of a gun.
Okay, so let me rephrase that. This is the first time we've ever seen an in costume Ghostface use a shotgun.
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
a shotgun, yeah.
that sequence is like just absolutely brutal. But there's a lot of force that's also in like the way that he stabs. And I like the fact that you have like these two kids, Ethan and Quinn, as
Almost pawns.
almost as like the characters. I was like, there's no way that like they have like the fortitude to like actually like stab that deeply, that quickly, that powerfully.
Oh, it's like the one that supposedly killed Dewey, picked him up off the ground with two knives, and it was supposedly the little girl.
Yeah, like
No different. I mean,
I think
drugs
that's
are a
kind of
wonderful thing.
the, yeah, that's it's some of the way that these kills are set up that like when the reveal is made, I was like before the reveal is made, let me phrase that. I thought this was Stu, honestly, because like the mask is of course older. Maybe he's coming back for revenge because like he had this whole thing and 20 years later, like just wants to come after the daughter of the guy that betrayed him. Like whatever. Like I honestly thought that it positioned Stu just because of how strong his character, like how strong some of the kills in this movie are.
And I think it was meant to be that way because I think the way it ended was kind of like Jason Goes to Hell with the Freddy claw coming up out of the ground and pulling his
Mhm.
mask down. I
Yeah.
think it's that kind of same thing that that's how they're building it, that they ended this in a manner that they have the rights to do what they want to do, where they didn't with Jason and Freddy.
Yeah. Did you have like a favorite kill in this movie?
Yes and no. So I was kind of irked that Samara Weaving is only in it for like 5 minutes. I feel like she should have been in it more. But
She was the Drew Barrymore of this movie. Continue.
it was kind of reminiscent of some of Tyler Maine's Michael Meyer kills in
Oh,
the Halloween Rob
absolutely.
Zombies.
Yes. Yeah, I 100% agree. Like there's a level of brutality here that definitely strikes reminiscent of those movies.
And that's kind of, I think, when they first came out, they were what the series needed to be for that time period.
Yeah.
And now we're what, 20, 30 years later or something like that from the original. Uh
27.
yeah. So it did what it needed to be to stay relevant. I think if it had the same level of violence and gore as the OG, it wouldn't be as impactful as bringing it up to date with the violence that you see in slashers today.
Yeah, I agree. I'm also like trying to think of like if I had a favorite kill in this movie because there are some like really good ones. Like I think it happens off screen, but like Greg, the roommate in the beginning, is a really good one because he's like essentially like dismembered and then like carefully placed in the refrigerator. I thought that was a good one. Um, but probably my favorite one would
Let's see, would that one have been a nod towards Jeffrey Dahmer, the people Dahmer?
uh potentially. I think it was just a cool kind of reveal, but Annika would probably be my favorite one that takes place in this one because it was definitely the most brutal. Um to where like stabs, turns, and then lifts. Definitely feels like it is probably one of my favorite gags of the 21st century is Art the Clown's upside down girl from the first Terrifier, where he like just basically slices from like vaginal canal all the way down to the her neck and just slowly like tortures her friend into watching. And that Annika's death kind of felt very reminiscent of that for me.
No, it just felt a little bit more graphic version of the others, just stabbing in the stomach like they always do. Had to give you a little hope. Oh, she might make it. No, she won't.
But I will also say that Annika's death, like in the beginning, where like he in the like how she finally ends, where like even seeing it like twice, like that just still got me the second time where like he like wiggles her off the ladder to Danny's house, to Danny's apartment, and then she drops like 4 or 5 stories from the hits her fate hits the dumpster head first and then just like splatters on the ground. That was probably my favorite death because it is also one of the more elaborate and one of the bloodiest deaths in this movie.
Yeah, it's one of the more prolonged ones. It's kind of drug out over the course of a couple sequences.
I'm okay with that. I am 100% okay with that. I've established it. I feel like between this podcast and doing like film reviews, I like blood and gore. So like if you can get creative with it, I'm here for it. That's probably why Anakin is my favorite in this movie.
Yeah, and I leaned more towards the brutality of it, which is
Yeah.
probably why Samara Weaving's was both the best and worst in the movie.
Yeah, that's fair. The last thing I want to talk about in this movie is the core four. And it's such a cheesy name, but you know, it is what it is. And like the thing that I want to end on is like the trauma bonding of these characters to where like they all experience these brutal deaths in the climax of 2022, the fifth Scream installment. and kind of how they've relocated to a complete other city now. But they're staying together. They're like watching each other's, and I think that's one of the positive things that can come out of trauma is that if you experience trauma with someone else, it brings you closer to it, and like it opens up this opportunity for you to like engage and talk with someone that has been where you've been.
Yeah, it gives you somebody to talk to that understands where other people may not. They can you all, and they even make the comment, and it was either this one or five, that how people tell you, "Oh, I understand," and they really don't, but I really do. It's one of those kind of things.
Yeah, I think that with this one too, that like there are like significant moments where like everyone's responding to it differently. To where like I get Sam and Tara are clearly the forerunners for this franchise. So Mindy and Chad really aren't developed as much as they are, but you can kind of see that like they're still impacted from last year's events to where like Mindy talks about how like she doesn't want to get hurt when they're at the hospital waiting for the like hear back about Gail. But it's Sam and Tara that are positioned as the the clearly like develops like leads of this movie. Sam is like going to therapy. Um, Sam is going to therapy. She is pursuing like a healthy like mental health journey. Whereas on the flip side of that, you have Tara that establishes very clearly on that she doesn't want to live in the past. She doesn't want to let 3 days define her life. Even the end of the climax, there's a sequence where like she's talking to Kirby. She's like, I don't want this legacy to be my legacy. Like I want to be my own person. I want a quiet thing, and she like goes to party and like tries to escape. So I think you have these two particular positions of like how this trauma has like impacted not only the individuals involved, but how it's united them as well.
Yeah, and you also have the fact that Sam is trying to deal with her issues, and the fact that it's made very clear she has some mental health issues. Um, and that's made clear in the second one or in the fifth one as well.
Yeah.
But Tara almost seems in this one not quite like she's in denial, but she's not really dealing with anything.
Well, which I mean, again, like having gone through like variations of my own trauma, that is like one of the very first things where like there's almost kind of like this like out of body experience that you experience where it's like I don't necessarily want to acknowledge that this is the reality because it feels too surreal to actually be real.
Yeah, and I think that goes to how Tara is supposedly dealing with it, kind of thing. Because they even go on to talk about that the mother abandoned both of them now at this point too.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and
they're on their own.
yeah, and so you kind of have these like I feel like, there is this like hesitation to where like Sam is kind of like been in trauma for the better part of 6 years at this point in this universe, where she gets this revelation that she is the daughter of a serial killer, and then she turns around 5 years later and finds out that she is also the uh not necessarily she was the girlfriend of a serial killer as well, who basically used her. So she's used to trauma, and you can definitely see that she's like in being used to that, she's definitely not comfortable in that trauma. So she's essentially she's united with these these three other people that have experienced some semblance of their own trauma that's kind of shared. I love the dinner sequence right before Quinn gets killed. I thought that was a nice moment where you kind of get christened with the core four. But um but I think Tara is, I think you're right, like it's in denial. And when you go through trauma, it's really hard to like actually accept that that's your reality. So you do things like drink, hook up with guys that have hook up with people that have bad reputations. And you just make a lot of toxic decisions if you're not willing to deal with that trauma.
Yeah, because Tara was very clearly making decisions with her bad idea genes on. So, or off, depending on how you want to look at it. But with this movie, she seems to actually, with the way the story goes, actually starts to acknowledge that there's an issue she needs to deal with.
Yeah, and that's why I think that like the events of uh this the end of this film and kind of what the Carpenter sisters go through kind of opens up her eyes to where she like sees like she has that moment with where she's talking to Sam and she's like I'm gonna go to so much therapy after this.
Yeah,
And again, like that's it, like an acknowledgement. The first step to recovery in any fashion is to admit that there's a problem. Like the person going through that has to be the one to physically acknowledge the issue.
right. Yeah, and that's pretty much what that scene is. That's
Yeah.
exactly what that scene is she's finally admitting to it.
Yeah. So I hope that there's a Scream 7 to kind of cap off Stu Macher and
Yeah,
see where
there's just too much story there to not. And they've
yeah,
also introduced the new guy, Sam's boyfriend. How is he going to
Danny.
play into this?
Yeah.
Is he going to be a tool, or are they just going to make him out to be the tool who's not really the tool, kind of
Which
thing?
look, Danny is played by Josh Saragara, and Josh Saragara is really good at being a character actor. But if you're a nerd like me and watched Arrow, he's also an incredibly like gifted antagonist. And I would love to see him. I was really hoping that he was one of the ghost faces in this movie. I do understand that like it would have been a retreading of what happened last year, but I really hope that they're positioning him to potentially be a villain down the line. Um, but he's also a good actor either way.
I mean, he did a good job of them making him out to be a suspect, but
They
that's
did.
also the way his character was written, which is the
Yeah.
way the boyfriend is always written in the Scream series. The boyfriend's always made out to be the suspect.
Yeah. I also was like just like while we're winding down, how did you feel about the whole Bailey being the killer and orchestrating everything to get revenge on the Carpenters for the death of Richie?
I kind of picked up early on that the cop was probably involved somehow, fairly early in the movie, especially when they mentioned during the opening interrogations when she mentions Richie. And there's a comment that she makes that he reacts to kind of oddly for just being the police officer of a
Sure.
friend. I
Yeah.
wish I could remember exactly what it was, but the reaction was kind of like that's not right. And he was doing too much through the movie to kind of point at Hayden Panettiere.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it was interesting that they decided to go back to that. But I like the fact that um like Quinn's death in this movie is a great callback to Billy's quote unquote death in the original Scream where they fake his death, and so like his twist as the killer is really well done um in this movie. And I also think that like they made Ethan way too obvious because like they didn't give him anything to do in this movie otherwise, but like
Other than be at the wrong place at the wrong time constantly.
yeah, essentially. Um, but like I don't read it too much into movies, so like when I just like I watch them. I'm not like trying to read into them while I'm watching them. That's the afterwards process where I get analytical. But like the switch of like Bailey being Richie's father, I was like, okay, all right. It was a great callback to Scream 2, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was definitely something that averted my expectations because genuinely thought that the killer was going to be Stu, the way that they positioned everything.
And it just, if they follow the same formula as 1, 2, and 3, it's setting up for Stu.
Yes, which fingers crossed. Radio silence don't do us dirty. I also
That's,
just want to go ahead.
I say that's what we need is the third one or the next one is going to be Stu and Gail are the killers using the boyfriend kind of as a pawn to play
Do it.
everybody into their trap. That's
Yeah,
what it's
I
going to be.
one of the things that I want to say, going back to the kills in this, Dylan Mulroney, his like 360 death, where like she puts on like Billy's Ghostface costume and just stabs him repeatedly in the arms. With it's not one of my favorite like deaths in this movie, but the camera work for that particular scene is glorious.
Well, you know why she was doing that.
Well, yeah, but
He's a
humor
cop
me.
with a bulletproof vest.
That's true. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, I think that's gonna do it for us on this episode of Abyss Gazing. Mark, where can people find you online though?
uh just the usual Instagram, paint miniatures, being nerdy, titanium juggernaut painting.
He's working on a big project right now. I saw it yesterday when I went down to go hang out with him. So
Yes. Very big
uh,
project.
you guys can follow us at Abyss Gazing wherever you guys get your podcast from. You can follow my film journey over at Letterbox at Captain Nostalgia. And you can follow our parent company, Victims and Villains, wherever you guys get your podcasts from: Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, and of course, YouTube, and of course, wherever you guys get your podcasts from. Until next time, remember that the longer you gaze into the abyss, the more the abyss gazes back into you.